It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Another week has come and gone. Every effort is being made by those who wield power to fuel the normalcy bias of industrialized nation populations until the last possible moment. What is coming won't seem real until it is real. If the majority of the population waits until that moment before waking up and joining the battle for the greater good, it will be too late to alter the equation. Though none want to hear dire news, it is necessary to examine and to face if we're to have any chance of changing course. Unfortunately, far too many still choose to embrace a false view of reality that has been carefully crafted by those who control the flow of information. Consider this timeless quote on that subject. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic societies. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes are formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. From Edward Bernays. Our collective reality will not be the same for much longer. In fact, it is changing by the day. It's a given that we face challenges that are yet unimaginable to most. Question: if one realizes that they are passengers on a sinking ship, what does one do? Give up? Go below deck and wait to die? Or do we look our children in the eyes and tell them with total conviction that we will summon the courage to seek out the truth, to face it head on, and to fight for their futures with every fiber of our being? What choice will we make? To those that are already fully engaged in the epic battle for the greater good, my deepest gratitude to you. Let us continue with our collective efforts to wake the masses and turn the tide. Dire breaking headlines in a moment. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the Global Alert News Hour, episode number 201, June 15th, 2019. News, again, most don't want to hear, but that we must face if we were to have any chance of changing course. This commercial-free frontline news broadcast is brought to you by geoengineeringwatch.org and paid for by geoengineeringwatch.org. This news hour is broadcast throughout Northern California on 1670 AM, 104.9 FM, and 105.7 FM, Saturday mornings from 6 to 7 AM, Sunday mornings, same time slot. Recordings of this broadcast can also be found at geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent top stories and radio sections. On the East Coast, the PRN radio network rebroadcasts this program Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. The latest Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials can be ordered from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for our approximate cost of producing and shipping. These materials are very effective at waking others around you, much more so than pointing at the sky and ranting. We make these materials available for our approximate cost of producing and shipping. Another way to help us sound the alarm on the geoengineering issue, if you're near a Gem Fair event, GEMFAIRE, Gem Fair has been and is an extremely dedicated ally in the fight to expose and halt climate engineering. Visit the geoengineeringwatch.org informational booth at all Gem Fair events. Get free geoengineeringwatch.org awareness-raising materials and help us in the critical effort to wake the masses. Visit the Gem Fair website, again, GEMFAIRE. Visit their homepage, find out where upcoming events are. You can get in for free if you're there to collect materials for this purpose. Just let the person at the ticket booth know. Next Gem Fair event is in San Diego, California, June 28th through June 30th. Before headlines, this important mention. I hope all will take the time to watch an extraordinarily moving and compelling environmental documentary titled Home, H-O-M-E. And, if you can find it online, another environmental documentary that changed the course of my personal life, titled Earth and the American Dream. On to headlines in regard to that very subject, Earth and the American Dream. What is the American Dream? Material possessions, At the cost of what? A planet that no longer supports life? Our priorities are very backward. We have stolen the future from our children. That is already a given. Already a given. Now the question is, will any survive? And those that don't believe that will soon. Headline, IBM is laying off more than 1,000 employees. Many people still buying into the notion that our economy is thriving and growing. It's an utter and total lie. Very transparent lie for anyone who chooses to look below the surface. Here in Northern California, lots of empty stores, more all the time. And yet people still buy into the lie because they can use their house for an ATM machine to get money out of and refinance and continue consuming. But at what cost? Stealing again the future from our children? More headlines. Job cuts soar 46% in May. Another headline, why you should not underestimate the severity of the coming recession. And by the way, it's not a recession, it's the end of the road of what was. This is not a bump in the road, it's the end of the road. As someone very wise that I just interviewed, which we will post next week, Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, who is considered the world's foremost authority on holistic medicine. But Dr. Klinghardt gave this example. Civilization is like a speeding train, a speeding locomotive heading toward a bridge that has collapsed, is no longer there. As an example, I've given the human race being like the occupants of a car that has crashed through the guardrail, hurtling through the air, and all they can argue about is which channel to put the radio station on. We need to wake up from that particular course that we are on. No question about that. More headlines. Australia's grim retail sector clearly in recession, warns National Australia Bank. Another headline, Morgan Stanley says concerns about a U.S. slowdown may be about to get a whole lot worse. No slowdown, no temporary scenario. Biosphere collapse means economic collapse, means societal collapse. Very clear. Another headline, retirees might run out of money in 10 years before they die. For most on the current course, they will die in 10 years. That's a mathematical, statistical fact. That's not my opinion. I'm not looking into a crystal ball. I don't have some voice in my ear. I don't have some hotline to a higher power. I'm looking at facts. I'm looking at data. When you see a car going 100 miles an hour that's 10 feet from impact into a solid concrete wall, you can say with absolute certainty it's going to hit and nothing can stop it. No amount of application of the brakes can stop it, and yet the human race is not applying the brakes, they're applying the accelerator. We must wake up. We must wake up and change course if we're to salvage anything. Another headline, climate change could trigger global financial crisis. Again, the absurdity of that headline is not even worth commenting on. There's no could, there's no may, there's no might. Another headline, there are so many unsold cars in India now that automakers are taking forced holidays. Doesn't sound like things are so booming there, does it? Just the snake eating its own tail. Let's keep making cars. There are cars put on lots idle all over the globe from automakers that are literally buying their own automobiles to keep their bottom line going. A snake eating its own tail. Another headline, unions reach agreement on 3,223 job cuts in Spain. Another headline, Aviva set to decline, 1,800 jobs slashed globally. Another headline, French government to announce budget cuts in early July. Another headline, Coles sheds 450 head office jobs. Another headline, this is the attempt to create jobs in Australia by destroying what's left of the environment. Here's the headline, Australia approves vast coal mine near Great Barrier Reef. What a great idea. The reef's already dead. You might as well poison it even more. And that breaks my heart. Again, I've been to the Barrier Reef on 2 expeditions, private expeditions, and I feel fortunate to have seen it before it's dead, as it largely is now. But this is the loot, plunder, and pillage mentality of those who wield power in the human race until the brutal, bitter end. And they could not do this without the support of their populations, by the way. I want to stress that. It's not just those in power. It's those who facilitate those in power. Another headline, glowing, quote, blue tears in China's seas are incredibly toxic and they're growing. From that report, the phenomenon known as China's, quote, blue tears is actually caused by a bloom of tiny bioluminescent creatures This is just one more form of algae bloom that's killing our seas, happening all over the globe because our oceans are superheating, deoxygenating, they're poisoned, and everything is dying. From the report, tourists from all over China come to view the twinkling seascape. Viewing the sights while everything is imploding, a bit like the cruises to the Arctic to watch the last of the Arctic ice melt away without any apparent understanding that that's a virtual death sentence. If all the Arctic ice melts and all the methane escapes into the atmosphere, we're done. But yet it's some sort of amusement for so many. The bloom in the East China Sea may be beautiful, the report states, but it is also highly toxic and it's growing bigger every year, like algae blooms all over the oceans. Another headline related to our dying oceans. Why are shark attacks on the rise? Question mark. As if these researchers don't know why sharks are attacking more people, even though there's less sharks, far less sharks. They have no food. The ocean food chain is completely collapsing, for those who don't know or understand that. Starting with plankton. Plankton population is down 60+% around the globe. Forager fish that eat the plankton collapsing everywhere. Fisheries being shut down. There is no food. Seals dying by the millions. U.S. military continuing to practice in the case of the North American West Coast with highly devastating weaponry that their own environmental impact report stated could kill up to 18 million mammals. Is there that many out there? I think not. Whales are washing up on beaches all over the globe, and yet we're most concerned about military practice, military war games. Because in the case of the U.S. population, as I stated in the beginning of this broadcast, has been very well trained to believe that somehow we are good, everyone else is bad, everything we do is about freedom and democracy, and everyone in every country everywhere sends us all their resources because they love us so much. What a blatant, glaring lie. And it's time we wake up from that lie. And again, patriotism is not about blindly supporting the official lie. It's about facing the truth. As the web of life dies, as the current paradigm can no longer be maintained, the power structure desperation, as I've stated so many times, will go exponential. On that point, 2 tankers attacked in the Gulf of Oman. Another headline, false flag, question mark, Iran has little to gain from Oman tanker attacks. That's obvious. Another headline, Iran foreign minister, quote, suspicious doesn't begin to describe, quote, attack on Japanese tanker during Abe's state visit. Question, how many blatantly transparent false flag events to justify U.S. military aggression against a country that has clearly been targeted? I've covered that over and over and over. So blatantly targeted that official representatives like John Bolton stated on the record, see you in Tehran in 2019. These are criminal, insane, warmongering maniacs that will stop at nothing to continue their aggression, to access the resources they need to continue the cancerous expansion of the U.S. military. And I'm not saying other militaries are good, not saying that. Not saying China is benevolent, not saying Russia is benevolent, but the danger in this equation is directly proportionate to the size of the military machine involved. And as I've stated so many times, something to remember and consider, U.S. military, bigger than the next 10 militaries combined. And to our U.S. military brothers and sisters, I've tried to give you the benefit of the doubt, but I'm losing that motivation. And in the past, I've given to DAV, Disabled American Veterans, for 20 years, VFW, Veterans of Foreign Wars, for 20 years. I worked as a volunteer rehabbing NAM vets. I brought former military Marine medic Dennis Kine to Reading twice to speak at my expense, to speak about what's really happening in the military. But too many want to pretend that everything is fine, that everything our country does is fine, benevolent and good, quote, in this simplistic terms, good. It's not good, it's not fine, and it will lead to our common demise if it continues. And the single greatest potentially counterbalancing force left on our planet is the U.S. population, if they would wake up. And we cannot win this battle to salvage what's left of our planet without our U.S. military brothers and sisters waking up, understanding what they're a part of, understanding that they are nothing more than paid mercenaries for a completely out of control empire at this point. If you truly care about your fellow citizens, if you truly care about honor, about virtue, about what matters and about what doesn't, you have an obligation to seek out the truth, no matter how painful it may be, to break the chains of programming and to help us to change course. Because without our military brothers and sisters waking up, without them refusing to participate in the insanity any longer, we have no chance. None. And for those who continually ask me, why does it matter to sound the alarm? How can it matter to reach a critical mass of awareness? That's why it matters. That's why it matters. We cannot fight this battle without an army of the awakened, without a critical mass, without undermining the systems from the inside out by those participating, those facilitating those systems, those facilitating the insanity, stopping their participation. That's the only way we can stop this juggernaut of total insanity that's the military-industrial complex from the inside out. Speaking of corruption, as desperate as many global economies already are, some are still keeping their cash flow going. Consider this headline: Corruption in Plain Sight. A company part owned by Jared Kushner has received $90 million in foreign funding from unknown offshore investors. The funds ultimately came through Goldman Sachs and Cayman Island accounts, tax havens. Question: is this what, quote, keeping America great again is all about? It's like a mafia. Our government is no different than a mafia, and it doesn't make any difference who the figurehead is for that mafia. It's still mafia. And it's very convincing to have the media seemingly fighting against the person who occupies the White House, this sort of good cop, bad cop, total theater. It's all theater. It's all part of the grand facade while the planet goes down in flames. It's time to wake up. We're not going to have a choice much longer. Continuing on, why hasn't glyphosate been banned in the U.S. since study after study has now proven it causes cancer and a long list of other human diseases? Why isn't it banned? Because it's part of the fascist paradigm. That's why. From the University of Florida newspaper, thealligator.org, yet another report of mumps outbreak, this time at the University of Florida. Here's the headline: Mumps outbreak among University of Florida students. Now let's move on to this headline, examine it a little deeper. 24 University of Florida students have come down with the mumps. But here's the part that no corporate-controlled mainstream media source will tell you. Every one of the students that contracted the mumps had an MMR vaccination. Every single one. Vaccinated upon admission to the university. For the record, mumps cases have increased since 2006, and according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, outbreaks can and are occurring in communities of people who have received the standard recommended 2 doses of the MMR vaccine and are particularly common in close contact settings. They shed the virus, and it is those who have been vaccinated that so often are the ones coming down with this ailment. We're not told that. We're just shown these outbreaks with the big flashing headline that everyone needs to get vaccinated, and we're not told that, oh, by the way, in cases like this, every single person who came down with this ailment was vaccinated. Every single one. It's time to look much deeper at the vaccination issue. That is another glaring example of the program deception that's been perpetrated on populations. Again, as I stated in the beginning of this broadcast, people's opinions have been fed to them from those in power so that they think highly toxic vaccinations that contain proven, indisputable neurotoxins like aluminum and mercury and other highly damaging elements are somehow safe, when the truth is they are anything but safe. From EcoWatch.com and other sources, yet another red flag headline of the loot, plunder, and pillage policy that is now worse than ever. Quote, President and Department of Energy redefines, quote, high-level nuclear waste to, quote, low-level to cut corners on disposal cost. How convenient. Just call something that's incredibly dangerous forever, call it not dangerous, and it makes it much easier to throw it out the window. In a move that will roll back safety standards that have been observed for decades, the Trump administration reportedly has plans to reclassify nuclear waste previously listed as high-level radioactive to a lower level, in the interest of saving money and time when disposing of the material. How much money and time does it save when we live on a dead planet? And although it's worse now than ever, and that's indisputable, the loot, plunder, and pillage policies now are worse than ever. But every previous administration, also power structure puppets, also a part of the problem. It's just getting worse, as such things do when you have a completely out of control, criminal fascist government. Things get worse. Why would we expect otherwise? Final statement from this report. The current administration is moving to fundamentally alter more than 50 years of national consensus on how the most toxic and radioactive waste in the world is managed and ultimately disposed of. Just pretend it's safe and throw it out somewhere. That's what they're doing. From MarketWatch.com and numerous other sources, this new report, which further highlights the inarguably dangerous and insane corporate-serving behavior of our so-called government, all at the expense of human health and the environment as a whole. Here's the headline, quote, President signs executive order streamlining biotech regulations. From that report, the President has signed an executive order intended to simplify the regulatory process for genetically engineered agriculture. So even though we now know it's highly dangerous, they're going to continue to propagate it, because not only is it profitable, at least in a temporary sense, before the planet completely implodes, it also helps debilitate populations to make them less healthy and easier to control. From that report, this also, the order signed Tuesday in Iowa comes as companies are turning to newer genetic engineering techniques that make it easier to tinker with the traits of plants and animals. Frankenfoods, that's what we're dealing with. So there you have it. Proven harmful, again, genetically modified Frankenfoods are being expanded and propagated, thanks to the completely out of control criminal cabal that's masquerading as the government of the United States. And this goes for all previous administrations. I have to say that every single time, because people are so programmed and so polarized that if you criticize a current administration, you must love the previous administrations. That is not the case. Or if you criticize the U.S. militaries, you must love China's military or Russia's military. No, that's not the case. That's dichotomous thinking. The world is a little more complicated than just this or that. We need to remember that. Another headline, new testing reveals popular kids' cereals contaminated with weed killer Roundup. That's just another repeat headline. More news on that coming out. Our foods are toxic. When you spray a toxic element like glyphosate all over the world, everything will be toxic, and so it is. And that's not even including the climate engineering insanity, which is contaminating everything with incredibly toxic nanoparticulates, starting with aluminum. Again, look for the exchange between myself and Dr. Klinghardt next week. Very productive exchange. Dr. Klinghardt, world authority on exactly what aluminum is doing to us and the entire web of life. From the UK Independent, this new headline, still another example of the increasingly criminal and environmentally suicidal behavior of the U.S. government. Here's the headline, quote, almost every country in the world agrees to cut plastic pollution, except the U.S. From that report, the United Nations announced that 186 countries reached an agreement which will obligate them to monitor and track movements of plastic waste outside their borders. Almost every country in the world has signed up to a legally binding plan to cut plastic waste, with the U.S. being the striking exception. We are the world's glaring example of loot, plunder, pillage, and pollute until the brutal, bitter end. Moving on. One more new report on the ongoing horrors caused by U.S. military aggression and the accompanying total lack of concern for the consequences that the military-industrial complex stands for. From scmp.com and other sources, this shocking new report, quote, Vietnam War, 44 years on, birth defects from America's Agent Orange are increasing, not decreasing, increasing. From that report, infants are still being born with birth defects linked to the toxic herbicide used by U.S. military to weed out Viet Cong fighters. The country could see 6 to 12 more generations of victims. They won't, because we won't be here on the current course. But anyway, the report states, but U.S. courts are so far not satisfied with evidence indicating a link. No surprise. Bought, sold, and paid for U.S. legal system, protecting corporate entities. We live in a fascist state, a fascist police state, and it's going to get worse fast. Like the ongoing and accelerating horrors in Vietnam, due to the completely unrestrained and all too often catastrophic activities of the military-industrial complex, the unfolding climate engineering cataclysm continues to decimate what is yet left of the planet's life support systems and contaminating virtually the entire planet in the process. Even now, after 70 years of fully deployed climate engineering, geoengineering, solar radiation management operations, the so-called science community is still doubling down on the official lie of denial that the blatantly visible climate engineering insanity being carried out in our skies is only a, quote, proposal. That narrative, again, is a lie of unimaginable proportion. Here's the reality of what has been done and what we face. Over 70 years ago, planet Earth and the entire web of life, including us, was subjected to a grand and lethal experiment from which there is no return. Highly toxic and catastrophically destructive climate engineering operations that are in reality nothing less than biological and weather warfare were deployed. And that damage cannot be undone. We can perhaps salvage some part of the planet's life support systems if we stand together and if we do it immediately. Tomorrow is too late. From Wired.com and other sources, this new headline of blatant deception, quote, more scientists now think geoengineering may be essential. Think of the absurdity of this. Pretending that this is not already going on. So-called scientists. I can only hope that once the population is fully awakened to what has happened and the level of deception that's been perpetrated on them, that they hold every single individual academician, pilot, materials handling personnel, everyone that has any part in this suicidal operation of geoengineering, that they are held legally and morally accountable. And everyone that is part of these operations, the family of these people, should stop to consider that they are facilitating their own demise. That's the mathematical fact of the matter. From that report, once seen as a spooky sci-fi, geoengineering to halt runaway climate change is now being looked at with growing urgency. A spate of dire scientific warnings that the world community can no longer delay major cuts in carbon emissions, coupled with a recent surge in atmospheric concentrations of CO2, has left a growing number of scientists saying that it's time to give the controversial technologies a serious look. Follow me through with this deceptive lie of an article. It states this: time is no longer on our side, one geoengineering advocate, former British government chief scientist David King, told a conference last fall. What we do over the next 10 years will determine the future of humanity for the next 10,000 years. Sorry, David, that's already been determined. We passed the point of no return at least 2 decades ago. King helped secure the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015, but he no longer believes cutting planet-warming emissions is enough to stave off disaster. He is in the process of establishing a Center for Climate Repair at Cambridge University. King says, quote, it would be the first major research center dedicated to a task that, King says, is going to be necessary. Is going to be, David? What reality do you live in? Seek out David King. Let him know what you think. Do it professionally. Send credible data. Do not threaten. That does not help our cause. Final statement from the report. Listen carefully. It says this: technologies earmarked for the Cambridge Center's attention include a range of efforts to restrict solar radiation, i.e. solar radiation management, from reaching the lower atmosphere, including spraying aerosols of sulfate particles into the stratosphere. Connect the dots. Please connect the dots. Jet aircraft are and have been spraying highly toxic nanoparticulates into the atmosphere for decades. We are working diligently behind the scenes at geoengineeringwatch.org to once and for all prove this. We have completed an East Coast atmospheric testing flight, and we are working on other aspects of our research that I will announce soon, perhaps as early as next week. Ultimately, all this data will be presented in the documentary film that geoengineeringwatch.org is working on producing right now. If all goes well, we hope to premiere this film in several months. Free public premiere, as all our events are always free, in Sacramento, California. Please watch for announcements on this. That's all I can say at this moment. But we are working feverishly, around the clock, 7 days a week, to try to once and for all expose this issue. Moving on. This parallel headline from the UK Sun newspaper, quote, plans to hack Earth's weather, could start World War III, panicked scientists warn. Scientists, please, whoever you are, if you are truly an expert, please tell the truth. Because the only excuse there is for not acknowledging the climate engineering insanity is the, quote, experts are either criminally ignorant of the field of study in which they claim to be experts, or they're lying. Only two possibilities. Also, there are these recent headlines of official lies, denial, and cover-up issued by so-called science sources. From Nature.com, the self-proclaimed International Journal of Science, these headlines of criminal academic deception. Quote, should we fertilize oceans or seed clouds? No one knows. What a ridiculous headline from so-called scientists. And this, developing countries must lead on solar geoengineering research. Does that make any sense? So the industrialized nations trash the planet, all of them, but yet somehow the burden of fixing the problem is on developing countries? A circus of insanity. That's what we're occupying, a circus of insanity. Groundhog Day in the asylum, every day, over and over. But not for much longer, not in the current paradigm at least. And there's this, geoengineer polar glaciers to slow sea level rise. There are some of the most ridiculous proposals to cover Greenland's glaciers with reflective plastic. Ridiculous things. Absolutely absurd. And this is coming from the science community. And finally, there's this. Global warming will happen faster than we think. No, it not will, not may, not might. It already has. More on that in a moment. Let's stop on that headline, by the way, for a moment to consider the massive financial interests there are behind the geoengineering assault. Let's consider the aluminum industry as an example. Aluminum being a primary element to be sprayed into our skies, as named in climate engineering patents. Why? Because aluminum is very reflective. It has a high albedo. It doesn't clump together. Low coagulation rate. Ideal material as long as you don't care about anything living on the surface of the earth. Aluminum has been showing up in countless atmospheric and precipitation tests from all over the globe, many from geoengineeringwatch.org. The aluminum industry is certainly all for climate engineering. Why wouldn't they be? The world's most recognized geoengineer has stated on the record their goal, spraying 10 to 20 million tons of aluminum into our skies annually, every year. So on this side note, for example, when you see the Alzheimer's commercials that say they're seeking a cure for that horrible disease, remember these facts. Members of the aluminum industry sit on Alzheimer's Foundation governing boards. Organizations like the Alzheimer's Foundation are facilitated to pacify populations. Such organizations will never acknowledge the core cause of Alzheimer's and dementia, aluminum, a fact that is proven by peer-reviewed study. So the next time you look up to see a geoengineering jet aircraft spraying toxic heavy metal and chemical particulates into your skies, consider all that I have just outlined. Moving on. How is the weather? Hazy, dingy, dirty, often grid-patterned geoengineered skies are increasingly the norm. Extreme weather and temperature whiplash scenarios are increasing rapidly as well, and will continue to accelerate. Massive and very destructive hail events will also continue to worsen, thanks to the patented chemical ice nucleation elements being seeded into cloud moisture by the climate engineering weather terrorists. On the subject of weather warfare, from numerous sources, massive hailstones hammer Munich, Germany. From the Watchers.org and other sources, more hallmark headlines of weather warfare and patented processes of chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. Headline, quote, massive hailstorms hit Slovenia and other parts of Europe causing major damage. From NPR and other sources, this new report, quote, completely catastrophic flooding and tariffs causing chaos for farmers. From the report, farmers up and down the Arkansas River, the Missouri, the Mississippi are also experiencing an unusual, some would say unprecedented combination of circumstances this year that are putting many in a very difficult situation. Again, a reminder, as I've stated before, extreme amounts of atmospheric moisture are needed for chemical ice nucleation processes to create surface cooldowns to continue to facilitate the most anomalously less warm place on the entire planet, the eastern half of the U.S. lower 48. And great consequences come from this, from flooding this moisture into the U.S. to chemically nucleate it to keep things cooled down. which in turn continues to confuse and divide the population of the U.S., the last potential counterbalancing force on the planet if they would wake up. It continues to confuse and divide them as to the true state of climate collapse until the last possible moment. In the course of these crop disasters, many are making money with disaster capitalism scenarios like the weather trading derivatives run by those who now manipulate the weather. And there's more consequences than just ruined crops. From National Geographic, this new headline report, which is long overdue, an acknowledgement of the catastrophic dying of the oceans. Geoengineeringwatch.org has been reporting on ocean dead zones for over a decade. Here's the headline from National Geographic. Quote, massive 8,000-mile dead zone could be one of the Gulf's largest. No, it is, and they're downplaying the size of this. Although 8,000 square miles sounds huge, it's actually bigger. So again, trying to weave these dots together. Geoengineers flood moisture into the U.S., chemically nucleate it, wash all sorts of toxins downstream back into the Gulf, creating a cascade of cataclysmic consequences. Record-breaking Midwest rainfall, this is from the National Geographic report, washed tons of fertilizer and sewage water out to sea, contributing to a devastating large patch of polluted water, scientists say. Just off the coast of Louisiana, Texas, where the Mississippi River empties, the ocean is dying. The cyclical event known as the dead zone occurs every year. It's only occurred every year since human beings made it occur every year. It's not a natural process. But scientists predict that this year's could be one of the largest in recorded history. Annual spring rains wash the nutrients used in fertilizers. Sounds very benign, doesn't it? Nutrients. No, poisons would be the more correct word. The poisons used in fertilizer and sewage into the Mississippi. That fresh water, less dense than ocean water, sits on top of the ocean, preventing oxygen from mixing through the water column. Eventually, those freshwater nutrients, again, sounds benign, should say poisons, can spur a burst of algae growth, which consumes oxygen as the plants decompose. The resulting patch of low oxygen waters lead to a condition called hypoxia, where animals in the area suffocate and die. Scientists estimate that this year the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, again, will spread to just over 8,000 square miles. This is a cataclysm. It's one of over 400 dead zones on the planet, getting worse by the day. Human activity, for those that still want to convince themselves that human activity, which includes climate engineering, is not affecting the climate and the biosphere, please, that is not a rational position. We've been horrible stewards of the planet. We have to face that fact, by the way. We have to, if we're to have any chance of changing it. How are conditions in other parts of the country where it should be wet? Exactly the opposite. Consider this new report from KOMO News and other sources. Feds upgrade Olympic Peninsula drought conditions from moderate to severe. Severe drought on the Olympic Peninsula. The drought classification for the Olympic Peninsula region has been upgraded from moderate to severe by the U.S. Drought Monitor. The drought outlook for the Olympic Peninsula just took another step in the wrong direction. The climate engineers can cut the rain off as long as they want. I've been over this again and again and again. And if you understand the why, there are many whys, many. You can't say it's just this or that, but we can certainly say, aside from speculating on the various agendas, it is a result of climate engineering, period. High-pressure heat domes that spin clockwise in the northern hemisphere are set up over the west coast of the North American continent to spin moisture up and over the top of us and back down into the lower 48, combining with Gulf of Mexico moisture, chemically nucleated, and thus we have the cool down. All of these factors are connected. And there is this factor. Again, you can search engineering wildfires at geoengineeringwatch.org to further understand how incinerating forests are further facilitating climate engineering operations by loading the atmosphere with particulates that spin to the poles because of the Coriolis effect and provide temporary cooling for Arctic ice. In essence, this is an attempt by the climate engineers to mask what is happening till the last possible moment at the cost of ensuring that no one lives. That's how a cancer behaves. That's how the military-industrial complex is behaving, like a cancer. A completely out of control, headless, heartless, soulless cancer that is concerned with one thing: its own proliferation, and the host, i.e. planet Earth and all of us, will die with that cancer. Climate collapse and climate engineering are both taking their toll in many other parts of the world, as this new report has covered in multiple sources. At least 30 dead, 2.2 million affected as heavy rains hit southwest China. Another tragedy in Yemen, same theme. Heavy rain turns parts of Yemen into raging rivers, causing deadly floods in southern and eastern Yemen. Another headline: tens of thousands affected by floods in central Indonesia as farms submerged and buildings swept away. We don't see a whole lot of any of this in the U.S., do we? Not much. It's either floods or fires. Climate engineering connected to every single bit of it. If we could expose climate engineering, the liability factor for all governments would be so massive that one can only assume the populations would take to the streets with their proverbial pitchforks and torches looking for everyone responsible. I'm not advocating violence, but I'm saying only this: everyone responsible needs to be held legally and morally accountable. The population must wake up to the fact that if we continue on the current course, we have no future. That's simple. Another headline: severe thunderstorms hit parts of India, leaving 8 people dead. It's all over the globe. And again, I'm not saying if without climate engineering we wouldn't have weather disasters. Not saying that at all. If we could stop climate engineering tomorrow, the climate is so damaged, the pressure built up in the system is so severe that the weather extremes will certainly continue. In some cases may worsen, but at least the planet would be on track to trying to find a new equilibrium without toxic particles being sprayed in the skies, without highly destructive radio frequency microwave transmissions tearing holes in the atmosphere, trying to manipulate these particulates and killing the entire web of life in the process. Moving on, too many new breaking headlines to cover. While forests around the globe are dying and incinerating in epic and unprecedented wildfires, from the environmental news site greenworldwarriors.com, this alarming new report: Tanzania plans to deforest 150,000 hectares of its largest forest lands this summer. This is so insane that countries around the globe, to try to perpetuate growth on a finite planet with finite resources, are literally consuming their very life support systems. That's exactly what's happening. And the human race as a whole is participating in this type of insanity, deforesting everything till there's nothing left, ripping the lungs of the planet out between the forest and the plankton. Obviously that leads to a dead planet. That's the direction we're headed. From the Times of India, this new report: Bhopal bakes in hottest June day ever recorded, 46 degrees Celsius, about 112, something in that range. The moment there's not enough basic resources, again, to sustain the basic needs of populations, the law of the jungle will prevail. Chaos and collapse will unfold. On that note, from the news source DW.com, this new headline report, quote, India heat wave triggers clashes over water. From that report, with temperatures nearing record highs across India, residents of some areas started fighting over access to water. Authorities stated that they have now had to deploy police to escort water tankers because the scarcity of water has prompted fights and stabbings at relief points. Back to the USA. From the San Francisco Chronicle, this new report of record heat. Excessive heat in San Francisco Bay Area is breaking records. From that report, the sweltering heat in the Bay Area shattered multiple decades-old records and caused a meltdown of the BART public transportation system and left thousands of people without electricity. San Francisco reached a new record high for June 10th with a temperature of 97. That's the official temperature. Temperatures on the ground were higher still, shattering the previous record of 88 degrees. 11-degree higher temperature than the previous record. 11 degrees. Where are the alarms going off? Why isn't this headlines in every paper everywhere? Because we're watching scripted political theater designed to distract and polarize U.S. populations until the brutal bitter end. From livescience.com and other sources, yet more red flag warnings that the climate collapse, being further fueled by climate engineering, is already unfolding. Here's the headline: Arctic permafrost is going through a rapid meltdown 70 years early. 70 years from that report. In the Canadian Arctic, layers of permafrost that scientists expected to remain frozen for at least 70 additional years have already begun to thaw. The once frozen surface is now sinking and dotted with melt ponds. This is what we have said at geoengineeringwatch.org for the entire length of our existence. It's not as bad as we're being told. It's exponentially worse than we're being told. That's the fact of the matter. Exponentially worse. Again, climate engineering further fueling the process. Let's collect more dots. With the climate and environmental collapse accelerating by the day, again with geoengineering further fueling the fire, how long will it be until grocery store shelves start to empty out? From WBUR.org, this new report, quote, the scariest thing about climate change, again no mention of climate engineering, what happens to our food supply? What are the images that you associate with climate change? This is from the report. Are they scenes of wildfires, the devastation wrought by monster hurricanes, the thunderous crash of a glacier calving into the sea? Maybe what comes to mind are floodwaters coursing through the city streets, or perhaps this classic, a forlorn polar bear atop a shrinking ice floe. All of the above are real dangers, but global warming poses another peril harder to visualize, more insidious, and ultimately more threatening to the stability of human societies. The impact of climate change on ecosystems that support our ability to grow food should concern us most. Where is the climate engineering factor in that equation? That is destroying the ozone layer, which is destroying crops, destroying the ozone layer, which is killing plankton, contaminating everything, waters, soils, which is affecting our food supply, killing forests, fueling wildfires. Where is the mention of climate engineering? We live in an asylum. It has to be brought to light. It must be brought to light, and soon. From CNN and other sources, Arctic melt, threat beneath the ice. Arctic is melting from the bottom up also. Sea temperatures are off the scale, been over that again and again and again. Oceans have absorbed so far most of the heat, but that's going to change very soon, just like your glass of ice water stays cold until the last ice cube melts away, and then the heating goes exponential. Plug that into planet Earth and get a picture from that. In regard to the unfolding planetary meltdown and climate collapse, how should we expect an increasingly criminal fascist government to respond? From Newsweek.com, this new report, quote, White House blocks testimony calling climate change possibly catastrophic because it didn't fit with the administration's views. Just change reality by serving up a healthy official portion of denial. From the report, the move comes as prominent scientists, senior military officials, and intelligence staffers have doubled down on their efforts to warn the White House of the potentially disastrous impacts of climate change on America's national security, a position that the current administration has adamantly opposed. Here's the president's response. From Newsweek, or from Washington Post, covered this. President Trump on Tuesday dismissed a landmark report compiled by 13 federal agencies detailing how damage from global warming is intensifying throughout the country, saying he is not among the, quote, believers who see climate change as a pressing problem. Stop, stand back, and understand. This scenario is ultimately not about the current occupant of the White House. It is about creating distraction and division in the population, which serves the military-industrial complex. It's also about the power structure doubling down on geoengineering as a means of masking climate implosion till the last possible moment, while waging weather warfare on populations in the process. On that note, here's another new headline to consider from grist.org and other sources. U.S. military emits more CO2 than most countries. As I've reported in previous broadcasts, the U.S. military is the biggest single-source polluter in the entire world. Biggest single-source fossil fuel consumer in the entire world. The U.S. military is also the single largest participant in climate engineering weather warfare operations, which are the single greatest climate disrupting factor of all. But please, I ask, don't misinterpret me on that. I am not saying, and I have never said, climate engineering is the only problem. That clearly is not reality. Countless forms of human activity are affecting the energy balance of the planet, affecting the life support systems of the planet. All of those are factors we have to deal with. But climate engineering, single most destructive of all. We have decimated the planet in the geologic blink of an eye. In regard to the buildup of greenhouse gases, we must remember and consider this. Excess atmospheric CO2 is acting as a trigger mechanism that is contributing to the thawing and releasing of mass methane deposits around the world that have been frozen for eons. How much frozen methane is there stored in the strata of our planet? Enough to turn our planet into a lifeless ball of scorched rock, as I've covered many times on this broadcast. We are on the track for what is scientifically termed Venus syndrome. Search geoengineeringwatch.org Venus syndrome to learn more. About the methane factor, the great outgassing of vast formerly frozen deposits is already well underway. The process will continue to accelerate. Methane is over 100 times more potent a greenhouse gas than CO2 over a 10-year time horizon. Methane is already saturating the atmosphere, covering the planet like a layer of glass. The sun's heat gets in, but can't escape back into space. By engineering massive short-term and highly toxic cool-down zones in the most populated portions of industrialized countries like the U.S., climate engineering operations are being used again to mask the unfolding climate collapse from populations for as long as possible, to keep business as usual for as long as possible, to keep populations from panicking for as long as possible. But in doing so, if the climate engineering insanity is allowed to continue, planetary omnicide is likely within the next decade or less. In regard to the methane factor mentioned, though this next headline report does not admit to the methane factor, it is a likely core to the equation. From the Watchers.news, this ominous report, record-setting noctilucent clouds, known as NCLs, seen over San Francisco Bay Area in California. From that report, a huge outbreak of noctilucent clouds occurred over Europe and the USA over the past weekend, with electric blue night shining clouds seen as far south as Oregon, Utah, and California. The 2019 Northern Hemisphere noctilucent cloud season began unusually strong on May 20th of this year. Sky watchers in the San Francisco Bay Area, California, witnessed extraordinary displays of noctilucent clouds on June 9th. As these clouds are typically confined to latitudes above 55 north, San Francisco is at 38 north. This marks one of the lowest latitude sightings of noctilucent clouds ever. This report, these sightings, are incredibly ominous signs of what is happening to our biosphere. So many people in our societies have been programmed to believe, because they want to believe also, that somehow the planet magically maintains its life support systems no matter what we do to it. That's not reasonable, it's not rational, and it's not reality. Seeing these clouds that are most likely directly related to methane buildup in the atmosphere, which these articles do not disclose. They don't disclose that factor or the gravity of that factor. This is something that must be deeply considered, along with everything else that I've covered in broadcast after broadcast after broadcast, trying to sound the alarm, trying, hoping, praying that somehow some set of circumstances will come together to help push the final rock over the edge to trigger the landslide of awakening. And each of us, every one of us, especially those who are already awake, can help to trigger that landslide of reaching a critical mass of awareness. And again, on the methane factor, learn more about this so you understand what's truly happening. Search geoengineeringwatch.org, noctilucent clouds, methane, to learn more. So much we are not being told, but these are indeed ominous signs. And I want to again make this point clear. The equation we face, the paradigm that's unfolding, is as non-linear as it could possibly be. It is unimaginably exponential in nature, meaning it is happening at blinding speed, absolutely blinding speed. That's why the circus of political theater is propagated with such effort from the power structure to try to distract the population to the last possible moment. We must wake up. We must wake up. We must help to wake those around us with credible data. Where do we go from here? How do we face such a gathering storm that is already unfolding again on all sides? Do we give up because many around us would try their best to convince us that we have no personal power, so why try? Or do we summon every ounce of courage we can muster, take a long look in the mirror, and remember that we are here at this moment in time for a reason? It is not an accident. Never forget this proverb, to thine own self be true, meaning we must heed the calling of conscience. No matter how great the odds are against us, we cannot lose if we do not give up. Consider this timeless quote from Rabindranath Tagore. Let me not pray to be sheltered from the dangers, but to be fearless in facing them. Let me not beg for the stilling of my pain, but for the heart to conquer it. Only together do we have any chance of standing against the growing tide of insanity that surrounds us on every side. We must, each of us, find a way to banish fear, to banish trepidation, and to summon the determination to persevere no matter what we face. We must remember that our will can never be taken from us, ever. Make your voice heard in the critical battle to sound the alarm and to wake those around you. Reaching a critical mass of awareness is the only way forward in this fight. Share credible data from a credible source. Make every day count. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.